My name is François Bergere. I'm the Secretary General of the Long-Term Infrastructure Investor Association, an association of 40-odd members, both asset owners and managers, dealing mostly, I should say, well, all of our investors are based in the OECD, and not that many are working in the emerging markets, but that makes it all the more interesting maybe to try and see what types of obstacle issues are still preventing a number of institutional investors to effectively take the leap and consider more seriously to invest in emerging markets, potentially using new financing models. So I have the honor of moderating this panel today, and we have from my left to the extreme left, Cendrine DELIVRE. She's a lawyer by training and partner at Asafo, legal firm in Paris. Then we have Andrew BLEASE, Asset Managing Director at Moody's, the rating company. Jean-Christophe BARTH, who's the Executive Director for WAP, the World Association of PPP Units and PPP Professionals, based in Geneva. We have Badr Idriss, CIO of Ithmar Capital, the Moroccan sovereign wealth fund and sovereign strategic investment fund, let's say, both of dimensions, as he'll surely explain. And last but not least, we do have SALAH, Infrastructure Development Executive Director for the Royal Commission in AlUla. For those who may not be familiar with AlUla, it's a big touristic and development in Saudi Arabia, but you'll have the opportunity to tell us more. So just less than 1 hour ago, we had another session on emerging markets. So we'll try as much as possible to take different angles to provide you with a complementary views on the drivers, features that effectively need to be addressed when contemplating investing in emerging markets. We do not have any sort of a directly financing party, I would say, with maybe the exception of Ithmar Capital. But it's mostly a diverse array of well, specialists from the legal, credit rating, association of professionals, and developers on a sort of broader sense than just infrastructure that are convened today. So hopefully we'll sort of complement what has been said just a few moments ago on this theme, which is a recurrent and frustrating theme, I should say. Every year we try to discuss and address these issues, and I believe I myself moderated a similar panel on a comparable theme in this place 3 years ago. So we'll try to see what is effectively new in terms of development. And of course, the first thing that comes to mind is that, well, on top of all the other challenges that may already have been discussed earlier on, well, we do have a significant crisis and even recession at hand. This is the new development, I would say, for this year, the global recession. And we do have to deal with a well-established pattern, which is that when OECD countries, OECD markets get a cold, well, emerging and developing markets usually get real sick. There's a lot of transmission channels that amplify and magnify the impact of those crises that may or originate in the developed world, whether it's repatriation, flight of capital, appreciation of the dollar and current depreciation of local currencies, imbalances in the public debt, deficits in the balance of payments, a lot of transmission channels which all sort of result in making the whole exercise of channeling investment in infrastructure more difficult. So we'll try to see, trying to see an exit in different angles to effectively assess what can be done. And I would like to start with you, Cendrine. on this. There's a well-established perception that legal and regulatory environments are an appropriate legal and regulatory environment is a key prerequisite for developing economies to effectively attract capital to infrastructure. So what's your point on that? How important is that? And is it in any way a sufficient condition to effectively get things started?
Thank you, François, and thank you, everyone, and thank you, Paris Europlace, for this invitation. Obviously, the question is key, and obviously, this topic of the legal and regulatory framework is key for the development and for the financing of infrastructure projects in emerging countries. It's a tricky question, in fact, because in comparison with the situation of the PPP laws 10 years ago, the situation is better. The situation is better, the legal framework is quite good, depending on the jurisdiction, depending on the emerging countries, of course, but a lot of work has been done by the states, by the regional institution, by the international financial institution to improve, in fact, the legal framework for PPPs. And so there is, in most of the jurisdiction in emerging countries, a local framework, a regional framework, but also PPP guidelines issued from the World Bank, the IFC, the Islamic Development Bank, the African Development Bank, so there is, in theory, it could be, it is a satisfaction to see that the legal framework is here. But, in fact, and when you see the figures, there are not so many PPPs closed in these emerging countries. Due to other obstacles, due to financial risk, due to political risk, and other regulatory issues. So I have no time to develop, but that is the first point I want to highlight, and to highlight also that everything is not in the law. There are also practices, contractual practices, which are very important to have in mind and to take into account depending on the system, the civil law system, the common law system, or other systems.
Andrew, so we also know that investment grade rating is usually viewed as a key condition for many, if not all, most institutional investors when contemplating investing or venturing into emerging markets. And I'd like you to elaborate a little bit on how this risk has evolved as you see it or as you follow it at Moody's, whether there's still a bias between perception and the reality of risk, and how is the situation evolving in that respect?
Okay, well, let's start with, I guess, what might be the key aspects which have driven perhaps an evolving perception of risk. And clearly, as throughout this year, we've seen the geopolitical environment deteriorate significantly, particularly obviously within Europe. So that made debt markets quite volatile. And the perspective, obviously, that we tend to have is through the capital markets, which tend to move faster than the bank loan markets, but nevertheless, there are similar trends. So more volatility in the markets meant that actually it was harder for people to place debt at the rates that they wanted. But nevertheless, we did see some transactions that were completed in 2022. Going forward, of course, we were now into a higher interest rate environment, so that will now start to impact cost of capital of projects, which will need to be factored into people's thinking. In terms of the perception of actual risk versus real risk, well, of course, from a credit rating agency perspective, we try to embed that all within the ratings that we publish. So that would be our focus and the guidance, the market, the information we provide to the market. Taking us to this, this concept of investment grade being important to raise infrastructure finance, I think it's fair to say that it is possible to raise debt for infrastructure with speculative grade ratings, but it's much easier, of course, with investment grade ratings because that increases the pool of debt capital that's available. And there are a number of ways in which that could be achieved within the framework of an emerging market focus, and narrow it down even further within PPP emerging market focus. And that's the use of credit enhancement products judiciously. I'll give you one example, actually, of that pertinent to this investment grade, non-investment grade debate. And that's a project which was financed a few years ago for a hospital in Turkey, the Elazig Hospital, a PPP transaction. At the time, Turkey's credit rating was BA1, so the highest speculative grade rating from Moody's, BA1. And the project achieved a Baa2 rating, an investment grade rating based on essentially a combination of two things, political risk insurance from MEGA World Bank and a liquidity facility from the EBRD to see through the insurance claim process. And it's interesting to know that as Turkey's rating has come down, it's now B3 from Moody's. The rating of the project has stayed Baa2. So I think that's probably where I'll leave it.
We'll come back on this in a moment. But in the meantime, Jean-Christophe, so you represent the World Association of PPPs, and you've been active in trying to work on a new, more inclusive or comprehensive definition of PPPs. Tell us about the work you've been doing and how it could potentially address some of the issues that have stood in the way for better scaling up of PPPs.
Thank you. 2 slides, please. Right now, we are in a real, I just want to set the scene a bit why we talk about this next level PPP. We're witnessing a perfect storm, or how other people like to call it, the predicted unpredictability, which means that all these things that happen today, in a way, we saw them coming, but we weren't really prepared to that. And that obviously also affects private-public collaboration. And this is why I believe there's a lot of factors that play into that. Third slide, please, or second slide. Yes, exactly, that's the one. And instead of actually bringing the world together, unfortunately, the global collaboration hasn't really intensified to find better solutions. What we see is rather fanatism, dogma, friendshoring, nearshoring. I mean, the geopolitical influence is just massive right now. And the flow of capital obviously is also affected by that among all the countries. Next slide, please. And this is why we need a new generation of public-private partnerships. I can identify a form of a renaissance because within our membership, we have a lot of PPP units, and there are a lot of new PPP units emerging. Sometimes it's because of fiscal constraints, and so they need to have a sophisticated approach to get investors in the country and prepare a project pipeline. It's a challenge to get bankable projects, but nevertheless, there's a lot of new PPP units out there, and we're trying to help them to do a new generation, a new approach, which we call not just doing the value for money, but going beyond and creating the value for future generation PPPs. If we are able to successfully deliver on these, we actually have a massive pipeline of sustainable and resilient projects that could tap into a 27 trillion impact investment and ESG space, which is massive, and we need it. And this is why I speak of a renaissance of PPPs.
So far, we've heard about some of the legal impediments, credit rating issues, the necessary evolution of the definition of PPPs to be implemented. Now let's turn towards practitioners And I'd like first to ask you, Badr, about Ithmar, the fund you're in charge of in Morocco, and how you have maybe evolved the mandate of Ithmar to steer and channel more resources, whether financial or technical, to effectively support and foster a scaling up of investment in infrastructure. So tell us about your experience in Morocco.
Thank you, François. I would like also to thank Europlus for the wonderful work and job done today and for the invitation. Also, I'd like to apologize on behalf of our CEO, Mr. Obaid, who couldn't make it despite his best efforts. So yeah, maybe a quick background on Ithmar Capital, which is the sovereign investment fund, strategic investment fund. We'll address this later. Launched in 2011, initially it was a fund dedicated to tourism to develop and foster investments in the tourism sector, which is a key sector in Morocco for obvious reasons, mainly job creation, FX generation. After a few years, our shareholders, the government of Morocco, decided to enlarge our mandate to 3 other sectors, namely the manufacturing, agriculture, agribusiness sectors, and also infrastructures. Why infrastructures? Because there's no competitive manufacturing or tourism sectors without best world-class and efficient infrastructures. Our mandate, as opposed to typical sovereign wealth funds from the Gulf region or some Asian countries, is more like capital seekers than capital allocators. We don't have excesses coming from natural resources revenues or trade surpluses. So we need to leverage public money in order to attract international capital, long-term and patient capital, to invest alongside this public money. So we have a double bottom line approach. We need to have developmental impact because, again, we are deploying taxpayers' money, but also we need commercially viable projects because without commercial viability, international or private investors will not invest alongside us. So with this, the objective also is to develop large-scale and transformational projects in order to have this impact on social and also economic aspects. So as opposed, again, to typical sovereign wealth funds, we do greenfield projects. We try to do identification, ideation of projects, preparation of projects. And this requires specific capital. It's not the same capital. And here there is a lot of issues and obstacles to overcome. Because when it comes to development risk, long-term investors are not really comfortable and prepared to deploy capital. So we need money from DFIs. We need money from other institutions. And here, of course, sometimes when we talk to DFIs, it's pretty tricky because very often they act like pure private/PE investors looking for guarantees, looking for collateral, looking for public offtake, which we cannot provide. We need someone to bear this risk, this development risk with us. Hence the importance of such players, so sovereign wealth funds or government entities, to de-risk this part of project ideation and preparation and get to this investment-ready or bankability stage, which long-term investors are looking for. But that being said, capital is available abundantly. Needs are rising due to demography, urbanization, climate change recently. So we need to break this paradox in order to get more capital and the right capital to develop projects and then to invest in these projects. We've seen many examples and illustrations of long-term investors coming from international money or capital willing to invest in Africa, but they need some prerequisites, some criteria that need to be met in order for them to consider this investment. And hence, works done by lawyers, works done by associations like the WAP, also by rating agencies in order to change this narrative and talk more about the achievements and successes rather than the risk and perceived risk. Here I would like to talk about the perceived risk across Africa. We talked about ratings and project or credit enhancement also. when you look at the figures from the Global Investment Hub or Infrastructure Hub, Africa is the second region with the lowest default risk when it comes to infrastructure financing, at least with the government. First is GCC countries. So Africa is better rated than Southeast Asia or Latin America. And this is real risk, real figures, not perceived risks. So there is also work to do and education when it comes to misconceptions, misperception of risk across Africa. And this is up to us as government-related entities in order to change this narrative and to show long-term investors that investment in Africa could be profitable and de-risked with the right partners.
Indeed, a very critical point, this sort of cognitive bias or gap between the perception of risk and the reality of risk in a number of developing markets seen from institutional investors. Amr, so you represent the Royal Commission for AlUla, and we understand that this is all about a big ticket, $10 billion, I believe, touristic development in Saudi Arabia. You're now sort of starting to develop the tourism dimension, in a way following in the steps of Morocco in that respect. And of course, developing such a mega project requires a lot of infrastructure developments. You're not directly tasked with investing or producing these infrastructure assets. So how do you manage this?
First of all, thank you for this invitation. I'm honored today to represent the Royal Commission for AlUla. Actually, just to give some background of AlUla as a program, what I can say, this is one of the giga projects have been initiated 5 years ago as a response to the ambitious Vision 2030 of His Royal Highness Prince Mohammed bin Salman. And this is a big transformation, and I believe it is a revolution in Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. And I believe in the region as well, because we know that this transformation happened in any other country in the region. However, to have this global and steady state for the projects, generate multiple of giga projects at the same time, it is very ambitious and optimistic. To be honest, the reason why the Royal Commission has been initiated is to have the same power of ministries. So actually, we are in the jurisdiction of AlUla as a county. We have the same power of the ministries, Ministry of Water, Energy, Urban Design. The reason for is to accelerate this development. We all know that all the development in terms of hospitality, leisure, attractiveness, it cannot be done without having a proper backbone of the infrastructure. Infrastructure is the enabler for any development in the countries. Therefore, the mandate for Royal Commission of AlUla is to prioritize the infrastructure development. And it is, by the way, it's about $20 billion ticket for only infrastructure. We are developing the primary infrastructure for the entire county. I'm talking about power, energy, water, wastewater, roads, tram, airports. So it is actually a big ticket. And we understand that this cannot be developed by own Royal Commission of AlUla. Not because of the cash, not because of the unavailability of funding. It is actually a collaboration with the entire globe technology transfer. One of the main goals of the Vision 2030 is to create jobs, transfer the technology from all over the globe into Saudi. So create jobs for Saudis and escalate and elevate the level and the quality of the infrastructure, attract all these brains and experts. This is actually the main goal. And the main goal of PPP in Saudi is not to allocate fund because the fund is available. Actually, we need to transfer this technology. We need to transfer the experts. We need to assure the job creation and the partnership and the localization of these experts within Saudi nation. Saudi nation is about 45% minimum with youth, and we need to invest on them to be the next generation for 20, 30 years. Actually, our plan is very ambitious till 2035. We need to match our capacity. On the other topics that we talked about regarding de-risking for the investors. As I said, now the government is actually trying to cover the gap between the demand and the capacity. Therefore, we are trying to match the expectation of the investor in terms of securing an IRR and the offtake to assure that they can mobilize and have the legal coverage, the regulations to help them invest and move their even headquarters into Saudi. This is the whole, in a very brief summary, what the AlUla is starting for.
So, getting back to the legal aspects that are key to scaling up infrastructure investments in emerging markets, you've been very clear in that the sort of legal or regulatory framework might be a prerequisite, but it's by far not enough. And indeed, we know by experience that in a number of African countries, for example, a big effort has been made lately to provide them with, often at the regional level, with directives and regulatory guidance on how to conduct and implement PPPs. And well, obviously it hasn't been enough. It might be that you don't just need a legally safe environment, but physically safe environment, as I believe was mentioned in the previous panel by another lawyer. But I'd like you, Cendrine, maybe to comment on one evolution we already see in the pipe, which is how the upcoming restructuring of public debt, of public financial commitments by a number of highly indebted countries might affect the climate or even maybe the legal or contractual safety net for private investors in those countries.
Thank you. Yeah, the debt restructuring and could have or may have or will have an impact, I guess, on some PPPs, on future PPPs, but also on some existing ones. What we can see right now due all this crisis is a lot of contracts. PPP contracts, concession agreements are renegotiated right now. And the ground of the renegotiation are often financial ones. And obviously in a PPP you have a private part, but also the public part, and the public finance in a PPP, as you said, is a key, is absolutely a key issue. And so the debt restructuring, even if it's very far from a contract, but on a very high level perspective, could have an impact on such renegotiation. I think from a very practical point of view, we need to have in mind that there are some tools. There are no magic tools, I think, regarding PPPs, and there are very different type of contract, different type of model of financing models. But I think we need to rethink all the public finance aspects of the PPPs regarding subsidies, regarding incentive tax expenditures during, in fact, the life of the project and of the contract. And I think it's a challenge, but it could be an opportunity, this type of situation, to rethink the financial equilibrium of the contract and to try to find a solution. This is absolutely key to have this in mind and to help, in fact, also the states or the governments. And I think that it's, you know, PPP is a win-win project, but I think it's absolutely key for the private sector and for the public sector to have very clear discussions regarding also the public finance side and its impact on the project.
Okay. Andrew, you told us about a number of schemes that allow a project to reach a better credit rating and attract potentially more institutional investment, make it more bankable. So given that those schemes already exist and have demonstrated that indeed they can have a transformational effect, how come they're not more often replicated? They haven't been scaled up yet.
Yeah, as you say, there's the scalability problem. I think the fundamental, the starting point for the both to think about this is the nature of the asset that's being financed, essentially an infrastructure project or as a subsector of that PPP project, which is very contractually based. So all of it comes. The key to it, I think, is to try where we can to standardize the basic project documents, because if the fundamental project documents are standardized, then the financing can be standardized. If the financing is standardized, then people will get much more familiar with it, and it will become, if not quite second nature, then certainly more understood within the institutions that will need to provide it. So I guess that would be my key takeaway for that. I think it's a question at the moment, a lot of project financing and PPP financing still follows the bespoke suit model, if you like, rather than the made-to-measure model, which takes something which is essentially pre-cut and then adjusts to deal with it. So I guess that would be my key takeaway on that.
Room for progress. Jean-Christophe, so you've told us about the various issues revolving around political or social acceptability for PPPs and private investment, the sort of social license to operate. Taking now the standpoint of investors, how would you, how can we reduce the pain points for investors, private investors in PPPs?
Thank you for that very important question, François, indeed. I believe three things are key to reduce the pain points for investors, to make it attractive and also sustainable for them long term. One of the things is design resilience into the contracts. How can we do that? Well, very simply by visualizing what we mean, because we have so many stakeholders involved from both public, private, but also civil society. You've seen that diagram, that round shape I showed in the initial slide. It's a tripartite relationship. And we can't simply go on how it's been done over the last couple of decades and excluding civil society. This is really important. We have to do some proper stakeholder management. Nowadays, this is what beneficiaries of an infrastructure expect, and we need to do a much better job on that. Then the other thing, in light of the predicted unpredictability I spoke about before, is it's crucial to make PPP concessions more resilient. How do we do that? Well, climate resilience infrastructure is just not an option anymore. Nowadays, we can't continue develop infrastructure, be they natural, nature-based solutions are absolutely essential to these things. Physical and social infrastructure are absolutely crucial because it undercuts all well-being and socio-economic development. So that's really important to put that center stage into our public-private partnerships, and it starts by agreeing, and I like to speak about facilitation of these things. I'm a deal mediator, so I help parties from both public and private to understand what they actually want to say, and this needs to be done regularly along the project lifecycle. Another really important thing is, I believe, the factor of domestic governance. The governance of a local ecosystem can have a major impact on a PPP. And it's important that the right level of transparency goes along. We need a level playing field for all actors so that they can meet without having a, I'll exaggerate, but master-slave relationship between the public entity and the contractor. It needs to be balanced out because at the core is the public service that needs to be delivered, and that over a very, very long period of time. And if we talk about regenerative PPPs, well, we build in that flexibility and that regenerative momentum where in the contract arrangements, obviously. And the execution of a contract, let me tell you, is a challenge. You can provide for all kinds of clauses, and probably you can write books about that, but you will never be able to predict all the possible things and traps that will occur over the long life cycle of a project. And one of the things that is really important there is that we ramp up dispute avoidance mechanisms. Nowadays, we don't talk about alternative dispute resolution anymore. It's negotiated dispute resolution what we need. Because alternative to what? Well, going to a state court is really not an option. Because, I mean, tell me one investor who is happy with having to deal in foreign law and another environment. It's not an option. So you want to have mediated solutions, not even arbitration. Arbitration is really only if you want to have a final binding settlement of that thing and you haven't been able to find a negotiated solution. And I'd like to talk about interest-based solutions that have been negotiated, which is nothing else than commercial mediation, deal mediation. And deal mediation is actually before it goes into a full-blown conflict and the fan hits, you know, where. So nowadays, I think to create a long-term win-win solution for all people, we need to have quick outcomes, you know, speedy and just dispute mechanisms that need to be encompassed into these contracts that deal with speed breakers and road bumps along the market changes that inevitably occur. We've seen what happened with the pandemic. Some projects pulled the force majeure clause, but most of them actually prefer to stick to it and adapt. And I think this is the challenge, building the right level of resilience into a contract so we don't have negotiations. I had a statistic that showed, I think it's from the Global Infrastructure Hub, the number of renegotiations relative to the number of years into the project, and it's just not good at all. So let's try to build resilient contracts. I think that's a win-win for all. And let me close with the necessity of having a perspective change, because according to the World Bank, adapting our infrastructure to climate change could save us a yearly, a staggering $173 billion per year. So that really is worth having a second thought about how we manage our contracts. Thank you.
Thank you, Jean-Christophe. Let me just add on this precise point of climate resilient infrastructure investment that our association is just publishing right now, a report on how to scale up private investment in climate adaptation, climate resilient infrastructure will be available on our website from today.
And we'll be happy to relay that information.
There is, so you told us about Ithmar. I understand Ithmar has been at the origin of a Pan-African initiative to convene and regroup African strategic or sovereign investment funds with the idea of pursuing a more developmental agenda. Could you tell us a bit more about it and how it could work?
Yeah, sure. I just want to say it's really not easy to be on this panel with such high caliber experts. I mean, it's really interesting and both frustrating. You know? Thank you all for your contributions. Regarding the initiative we developed within Ithmar and with 9 other sovereign investors across Africa, the objective was pretty simple, actually. We tried to identify the 3 main challenges we are facing as strategic and sovereign investors within the continent. And actually, there is 3 main challenges, and we like to talk about challenges rather than issues in order, again, to change the narrative. First one is clarity. Long-term investors need clarity, need a sound, business-friendly environment and framework in order to, you know, consider investment, a long-term investment. When it comes to infrastructure, we're talking about 20, 30 years investment. So they need to know that the rules of the game are clear. They might change, but they will be also business-friendly even if they change, and they will take into account the investments, the investors' specificities and the technicalities. The second one is capacity building. Infrastructure projects requires a sophistication, requires financial engineering, technical engineering, legal engineering. And we know that governments and government-related entities across the continent, we don't have this kind of sophistication, hence the role of associations like the WAP or technical assistance from the DFIs in order to help these ministries and line ministries to develop these specific skills and capabilities. And the third one is scale. We need scale. We love our respective countries and our continent, but we don't have scale. We know that large capital allocators will always prefer to deploy $1 billion in a infrastructure project, I don't know, in Australia or Latin America, rather than into 5 or 6 smaller projects across Africa. So we need to develop initiatives that will pool projects and capital in order to be audible to these international investors. Hence the initiative we've initiated and developed and launched last June called Africa Sovereign Investors Forum. And the objective is to cooperate and have this continuous dialogue amongst sovereign investors in Africa in order to share knowledge, share expertise, but also learn from our respective successes, but also failures, and also develop an investment platform that will get these projects to an investment-ready stage and also meet investment criteria of these international investors. For the sake of time, I'm going to pause here, maybe just to let my friend know.
Thank you, Dries. So, you have the final word. So, we understand that you are conducting a relatively new initiative, at least in the Saudi environment, trying to attract lots of private capital to a development program with a lot of innovation. We understand as well risk perception is key to attract those investors. So how do you deal with that? And in particular, I believe you have come up with a scheme to somehow mitigate demand risk. Could you tell us a bit more about it?
Yes, as I have the introduction of the Vision 2030 of Saudi Arabia, which is the driver for the AlUla and the other giga projects, we are thinking about what should be Saudi Arabia in 2030 or 2035. So this is actually a very ambitious and a very high-level objective and strategic. And we are building our infrastructure to accommodate the demand by 2035. Of course, it will be on phases. However, it should be with a quantified and recognized risk.
Bonjour. Madame Mansour, pardon.
Okay, so accordingly, this gap between the capacity for the infrastructure we are building and the actual demand ramping up, we have to have this gap in our consideration. And as I said in the beginning, the reason why we are approaching the private sector is to have this collaboration in terms of the technology transfer and job creations in the new society of Saudi Arabia. Therefore, the Saudi government, which is the Royal Commission, basically, we are representing Saudi government, they are willing to subsidize this gap to assure a decent IRR for the investors. And this will come with the long-term negotiation. We are talking about, for example, I don't want to take the time, I know the time is almost finished. So we are talking about an airport with about 900,000 passengers per year. Now we have much less than this. So who's going to take this risk on the gap between the actual and the forecasted demand? This risk will be taken by Royal Commission of AlUla to assure that we have the right operator and investor to AlUla and airport infrastructure. The same applicable for tram, for roads, for energy, solar, and we have a clear objective in AlUla development to sustain our fiscal sustainability, plus the innovation and technology and smart city. So it is actually a very ambitious program, assuring that all the ecosystem aspects have been respected to the benefit for both partners, the private and the public partnership. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Amr. So time to wrap up. I think we've seen we face very different situations. Obviously, the situation in Saudi Arabia is not the same as in Morocco or Sub-Saharan Africa. There's quite a few innovative schemes out there. Some of them have been touched upon during this exchange. The risk, obviously, is a central dimension, or the perception of risk, or tools to mitigate or enhance the credit rating are keys to scaling up. I believe we probably need to sort of play on all these levers to effectively change the current trend and eventually scale up significantly the volume of investment in emerging markets that is more needed than ever right now in 2022. So thanks again. Please join me in giving a round of applause to our panelists.